session. So tonight peers meeting is co-sponsored by the Long Island Activists, another NYPAN chapter here in Long Island, and also East End Action Network in Suffolk County. So we're really pleased to have with us some wonderful representatives throughout the state, actually. But I want to tell you what to expect in tonight's meeting. We're going to start with a congratulations to Assembly Member Fred Thiele for winning his election and representing us once again on the East End, as he has done so well over many years. And Fred had a vision a long time ago to create a community housing fund, which he saw through the legislature, got on the ballot, and the proposition won in the 4 towns in which it was on the ballot. So Fred's going to give us an overview of that to start the meeting. And then about a half an hour into the meeting, we're going to pivot to discuss the New York State results on the Democratic Party side and what we may be able to do to improve that come the next election cycle. And joining us for that, we have Melanie D'Arrigo, who was the candidate for CD3, and Erica Vladimir, who is with Ione, New York, and that will be moderated by Catherine Levy, and she will give you more extensive background on both of those when we go there. So what we're going to do is after Fred speaks or while he's speaking, if you have questions about the community housing fund and the Proposition 3, the referendum, please drop them in the chat. And Julie Sheehan will moderate the chat and call on you, or she will read the questions depending on our time. So without any further ado, I welcome, to the floor, Fred Thiele, who has been a proponent of almost all good issues out here for his career. And we're just thrilled to have him to talk about the community housing preservation tonight. Please take it away, Fred.
Well, thank you, Catherine. And, thank you for the good wishes. And, for those of you that were in my assembly district, I do want to express my thanks for all the support. For my reelection, certainly, it was obviously a very, very tough cycle for Democrats on Long Island. And, your work was very helpful to me. And I just want to say thank you. And also, I think I spent as much time campaigning for the community housing fund as I did for myself, actually, during this cycle. And at one point, we were doing so many, public events for it. I was tempted to get like the Community Housing Fund 2022 tour T-shirt with all the places that we spoke, and it was those kinds of things that made a difference. But let me just start out. I'll just refresh your memory, and for those of you that that aren't on the East End, what the Community Housing Fund is all about. And most of you know that we've got a community preservation fund on Long Island, which is on the East End, in the 5 East End towns, which has been in effect since 1998. It's generated $1.9 billion for land preservation and water quality. We've preserved more than 10,000 acres with it. And the theory of the housing fund is, if we preserve our land and we preserve our water, but people can't afford to live here, if we can't preserve the human beings that have made our community the special place it is, we haven't done our job. We really haven't protected community character. So, actually the idea for the Community Housing Fund, goes back to the year 2002. I have a report, I think it's sitting on my filing cabinet here, that we did in 2002. And, I looked at it, and literally 90% of what ended up in the final legislation was in that report, 20 years ago. And so it took 20 years to happen. It's, this is going to be one of those overnight successes that took us 20 years to do. It reminds me a little bit of, when the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed, there was the Senate Republican leader, his name was Everett Dirksen. He had voted against the Civil Rights Bill every year from 1948 until 1964. And in 1964, he voted yes. And they asked him why he voted yes. And he said, well, it's an idea whose time has come, right? So kind of a flip answer, but that's the way I look at the community housing. Finally, it was an idea whose time has come. And I'll just give you the brief overview again of what this bill did. We needed an act of the state legislature, which is how I got involved, for the 5 East End towns to have the authority to create the fund because it involves a tax. And we passed this bill for the first time in 2019, but Governor Cuomo vetoed it, which cost us at least $50 million in revenue for housing, that vetoed. But in 2020, was in the middle of the pandemic, everything was pandemic focused. But we came back in 2021, passed the bill in both houses, and Governor Hochul signed the bill in October of 2021, just a little bit more than a year ago. But it was authorizing legislation. It authorized each of the 5 East End towns to create a community housing fund. Each of the towns had to pass their own local law. They also had to provide a housing plan of how they were going to spend the money. And finally, it was all subject to a mandatory referendum in each of the towns. So, the funding mechanism, for the Community Preservation Fund, we had a 2% real estate transfer tax. What we proposed here was an increase in the transfer tax of just an additional 0.5%. So the total transfer tax is 2.5%. And 0.5% of it would go to housing. We also increased the exemption. There's an exemption on the first $200,000 of each recent real estate transfer. We increased that to $400,000. It hadn't been increased since 1998. I think I said 200,000. It went from 250,000 to 400,000. And just to kind of give you an idea of where we are, we picked that 250,000 in 1998. Because that was the median price of a house on the East End, on the South Fork in 1998. Those houses that went for 250,000 then are going for over $1 million now. So we increased the exemption because we didn't want the increase in the tax to have an impact on the affordable end of the housing market. So the funding mechanism is simply an increase of 0.5% with also an increase in the exemption. The estimate in the 4 towns is that each year it will generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million a year for affordable housing. And so, that's the one part, that's the funding part. As far as what it can be used for, it is extremely flexible. The towns in their plans, almost anything you can think of that would generate a affordable housing inventory is included. Home ownership, rental housing, public-private partnerships, accessory dwelling units, first-time home buyer assistance. All of those things are eligible to be used by this fund. Each town is a little bit different, and each town will, through their plan and their program, focus on what they believe is the most effective way in their community to do this. So, so as I said, the state passed it, the towns passed their local laws. We had to have the referendum. So let me just talk a little bit about the referendum campaign. We did some polling on this in September on the South Fork in Southampton or East Hampton. And, there were some countervailing forces out there. First of all, we didn't have to educate people about the fact that there was a housing crisis on the East End. Everybody understood that. They live with it every day. There wasn't a lot of convincing and education that had to be done with regard to that. So they understood the need. We had to educate them about how this proposal would help to address that need. And, that was part of the work that had to be done during the campaign. But the other side of it is, and I say there were countervailing forces out there, people aren't really in a good mood out there, as far as the body politic. You ask that question, are things headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? That question was underwater. It is across the nation and the state, but it was on the East End also. So people don't think things are headed in the right direction. And when we ask them whether or not they like their town government or not, The answer was pretty much not so much. So they really didn't really have a lot of faith in government. They think things are headed in the wrong direction, and they were in a cranky mood, I think is the best way to describe it. So that reflected some of the initial results we got in the polls as far as passing this referendum. For Southampton, when we asked people about whether they would support the referendum, it was in the low 50s. And in East Hampton, it was a little bit better. It was in the high 50s when we originally polled it. So, we knew we had a chance to pass the referendum, but it required a robust campaign with the right message and the right messengers to get a successful referendum. And as many of you may be aware, that the towns aren't allowed to advocate for a referendum. All they can do is provide educational material and informational material. They can't advocate. So we needed a committee to do that. And there are, Catherine was a big part of that committee. I don't know if Michael Daly, I don't see him on here tonight, but Michael was part of that. There was a whole group. I'm not going to mention everybody by name. And, a lot of them were novices when it came to running a referendum campaign. We got Kevin McDonald involved from the Nature Conservancy, who had run almost every environmental referendum out here over the last 20 years. And, Kevin made a lot of the snowballs, but, the committee threw the snowballs. And, the things that we knew is that, people, you couldn't spend a lot of time talking about the process and the procedure of how all of this would work. What was the most effective measure is who was going to be helped by the Community Housing Fund. And the face of this referendum and the face of the campaign were nurses and teachers and small business people and people that local firefighters, ambulance workers, people that are having trouble staying here, or local businesses that can't find employees on the East End because of the housing crisis. Because essentially every issue that Pierre probably talks about ultimately comes back to affordable housing. If you talk about traffic and transportation problems, well, it's exacerbated by affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing, because people have to live outside the area and travel into the area. If you're talking about emergency services and healthcare, again, it's the lack of affordable housing. Local Main Street businesses, they can't find workers. School districts can't find teachers. So we put a face on this problem during the campaign by putting forward the very people that would be helped and needed this. And it was a very robust campaign. Catherine, you might know the number a lot better, but I think somewhere between, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $250,000 got raised to run this campaign. It was an aggressive mail campaign, an aggressive digital campaign, and people on the ground also. And, so that's what really made the difference. I think when we started out, we thought it was a long shot to pass this in all 4 towns. We always thought we were in the best shape in East Hampton. Southold, we didn't have a lot of information on Southold. Southold was kind of quiet, although there was bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats supported it on the town board. Where we had issues was Shelter Island. Shelter Island was the only town that had organized opposition to the referendum. A lot of very, very, very wealthy homeowners on Shelter Island who thought that Shelter Island should be their private refuge from the outside world, really kind of banded together to try to oppose the referendum. They spent a lot of money. They took out ads. They spread a lot of misinformation. And we started out way behind on Shelter Island because of that. But the campaign really helped to turn that around. And Southampton, we felt, was a problem also. The number we said was in the low 50s, and there were just a lot of difficult issues that occurred in Southampton during the campaign. there was that whole thing in Hampton Bays with the Hampton Bays downtown business district study, with the issue with the town's consultant, who had in their contract that basically the part of their task was to discredit opposition. Wasn't exactly friendly to public involvement. We had that controversy. We had the Liberty Gardens affordable housing project that was very controversial. So, there was just a lot of discontent in Southampton, and, the campaign made the difference. That high 50s number in East Hampton turned into 68, 69%. The campaign in Southold, generated 58%. We were probably behind in the beginning on Shelter Island 2-1. And as we won by a whopping 15 votes on Shelter Island. And, I'm still keeping my fingers crossed, because the recount happens tomorrow for Shelter Island at 2 p.m. And in Southampton, because of all of the resistance that we had out there on some other issues, without the campaign to counteract some of that, we started out in the low to middle 50s, and that's where we ended up, 53%. We kind of estimate that the campaign was good for about 8 to 10%. We increased the number from high 50s to high 60s in East Hampton. I think it helped us with the resistance that we had in Shelter Island and in Southampton. So I would have not mortgaged my house and bet the proceeds on us winning in all 4 towns. I felt that if I did, I might have needed the benefits of this program, because I think I would have lost my house. But amazingly, we won in all four towns. So I want to focus just a little bit before we turn it over to questions to what are the next steps, because this doesn't end now. There are, first of all, there's still a lot of opposition out there. There's still a lot of resistance to affordable housing, and we can't be in the position of, hey, we won, the hell with you people that were opposed to this. We still have to bring people in. We have to build consensus and build additional support, I think, if this program is going to be successful. And so I think, continued advocacy, continued involvement, continuation to bring people in to dispel their fears and their concerns about an affordable housing is still a key, especially in Southampton and in Shelter Island, where the margins were relatively pretty thin. So I think that's part of the job ahead. And there's just the mechanics of setting this up. We're creating a program from whole cloth. I mean, some of this, is just, we're imposing a new tax. So it's an extra 0.5%. And we're changing as I said, we're changing the exemptions. All the forms for the tax forms for real estate transactions now have to be changed. We're going to have to sit down with the county clerk's office, which collects the tax for the towns, and work with them, on the changes that are in the program. We have the real estate industry and the attorney and the legal community that works in the real estate industry, and we're going to have to educate them as to the changes this will impact on house closings, on real estate closings. And we actually have to pick the effective date of when the tax will go into effect, probably not until April 1st. So there's all that kind of mechanical stuff. And then we have to create these programs. The towns don't have a first-time home buyer financial assistance program. They're going to be expanding, the number of projects they're doing. We probably need to create a robust financial assistance program for accessory dwelling units. I think there's the need to outreach for major employers that need employees, the agriculture industry, the hospitality industry. Big employers like the hospital, school districts, the idea for public-private partnerships. So, the next step for us is going to be to bring the 4 towns together, probably in early January, and, roll out a strategy for implementation in 2023. And we need your continued involvement, people that are involved with this from Pier, others like, East End, YIMBY, all of those that have been advocates, Habitat for Humanity, the Long Island Housing Partnership. We have to craft a program, and the first projects, the first use of this money has to be successful. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and the first projects, the first programs we do have to be successful, because if they're not, that only having 53% in Southampton is, there's going to be a lot of people that say, we told you so, if we don't get this right. So, I urge all of you to stay involved with the affordable housing issue, and, help work with the towns, on the implementation, on continuing to build public support, across the East End. And, I think that's what will lead to a successful program. We had to do the same thing with the Community Preservation Fund. There was no Community Preservation Fund office. There was no, infrastructure in place to make that many purchases for land preservation. So, it all turned out well. So we all have, fond memories, and, the Community Preservation Fund has been copied probably 24 times across New York State. I look at this, we want to do it right for ourselves, but we're also a model for the rest of the state. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school, but I expect that housing is going to be one of Governor Hochul's top priorities when she does her State of the State address in January of 2023. So there's still a lot of work ahead. I urge all of you to continue to stay engaged with this issue, and help to provide the support and the encouragement to the town boards to do the right thing.
Great. Fred, a question from the chat from Steve Abramson. Do the towns have deadlines by which they must present detailed plans on how the funds will be allocated?
Yeah, I think I have a 2-part answer to that. First, they can't spend any money from the fund until they have approved and adopted plans as to how they're going to spend the money. And most of the towns, I think, came up with very general plans during the summer and fall, giving general priorities of, how they would expect to use the fund. But I think they've got to put some meat on those bones, in the coming months, as to more particulars and more specifics. So, their deadline is that they can't spend any money until they have more detailed plans. The second thing that relates to that is, when does the tax go into effect? When do they have to start to collect money? It can't be any sooner than 60 days after the passage of the referendum. So that brings you into January. The tax department likes to start new taxes on a quarterly basis, because a lot of reporting is done on a quarterly basis. So in the Community Preservation Fund, the start date was April 1st. The towns will have to decide whether or not they'll be ready by April 1st, but I would expect that's probably the likely start date for collecting the tax. And then, the towns, I think, really do need to do more work than's been done already in filling out these plans before they start spending the money.
Great. We need to move on to the next segment, but there are 2 more questions. And I just wanted to point out to everyone, you had said, Fred, that, everyone should stay involved. And Catherine put her email in the chat. So if you want to get involved, she's the person to contact, Catherine Soka. gmail.com. And the two questions, if you can very briefly
Sure.
touch on them from Catherine herself. What are the number of participants for the town advisory committee? And is there a minimum and maximum on that? And then from Susan Steinman, are there plans to have housing that is affordable for low wage workers such as farm labor and hospitality?
Yes, so let me talk about the advisory committee first. Very important part of this. They're the ones that will be making recommendations to the town board about how to spend the money and what should be in the plan. It's a minimum of 7 and a maximum of 15. There has to be at least 3 housing advocates on these advisory committees. There has to be, I think there's a representative from I think one from the real estate industry, one from the building industry, and I think one from banking. So, basically there have to be a representation of the stakeholders that are involved with this. In addition, if you're a town that happens to have an Indian nation in it, Southampton, there needs to be a member on the advisory committee from the Shinnecocks. And if villages in the town are going to participate, the villages get a representative on the advisory committee also. I would recommend the towns, lean towards the higher end of that and get as much input as possible, but minimum of 7, maximum of 15. And the second question about housing that's affordable for lower wage workers, such as farm labor and hospitality. As I said, each town will have their housing plan. They will make those decisions ultimately, but I can tell you that the statute was written in a way to encourage those kinds of partnerships. It was key to for example, in farm labor, it was key for getting the support of the Long Island Farm Bureau, and also in working with members of the restaurant industry and the hotel industry. So I expect that will be a part of the plan in each of the towns, and ultimately those decisions are made by the town. But the statute certainly recognizes those needs and kind of encourages those kinds of partnerships.
That's terrific, Fred. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us about the Community Housing Fund. Please, for those who are interested in joining the effort to educate and work on it, get in touch with me. And I'd just like to say one thing, that the Community Housing Fund is just one tool. So there hopefully will be other ways in which we can work on our housing crisis, which is critical on the East End as it is in other parts of the state.
So Catherine, if I could just add one more thing, because you're right, especially on housing. This will be brief, but there was kind of some fits and starts with accessory dwelling units in the governor last year, and we did introduce. After that failed, I did introduce some legislation to provide incentives for accessory dwelling units. So I think that is something, it's good to have the local money, but incentives coming from the state for things such as accessory dwelling units is something that I think we will need to focus on next year. And now I promise I'll shut up and let you get on to the next category.
No, this is fantastic. A lot of information in a very short period of time. We appreciate it, and I guess that tour that you went on helped you kind of hone your description of the Community Housing Fund down to a short amount. So please stay with us, because now we're going to pivot to our discussion about the state of the New York State Democratic Party and initiatives. And I'm going to turn it now over to Catherine Levy, who will moderate that section of our program. Thanks again, Fred.
Thank
you, Catherine. Thank you, Fred, for everything that you do for us. I'm so excited to welcome Erica and Melanie here. I'm going to give a very brief introduction of both of them because we have a lot to talk about tonight. Erica Vladimir is a New York State committee member from AD 76.
Whoops. I think that I might have just hit a button that removed Catherine from the room.
No, I'm back, Catherine.
She's back. Yeah, excellent. Oh, that was
okay.
wow. You're impressive.
So Erica is a New York State Democratic Committee member from AD 76 and a member of the steering committee of the Invest in Our New York campaign, which she just dropped some very important information in the chat about that. She's a lawyer and a prominent progressive activist and one of the co-founders of the Sexual Harassment Working Group. Melanie D'Arrigo, whom I think many of you know, is one of the leading progressives on Long Island. She was a candidate for CD3 in both 2016 and 2020. In 2020, with the enthusiastic endorsement of Peer and NYPAN. She's also the co-founder of Be the Rainbow, a nonprofit that advocates for the LGBTQ community, and the Nassau chapter of the Sunrise Movement. So, and if everybody were like the two of you, we'd probably be in better shape, but we are where we are. As I presume everybody on this call knows, Republicans flipped 4 seats in New York State this time around. It was the worst showing of any Democratic Party in the country. And to give you a sense of where that leaves the House, right now, the count in the House, which isn't complete, is 220 for Republicans and 212 for Democrats, or no, 213 for Democrats. If we hadn't lost those 4 seats, the Democrats would be leading in the House right now. And the Republicans might control the House in the next 2 crucial years because of what happened in New York State. So I'd like to begin with a question to Erica and Melanie about what went wrong here. And I think Erica has some statewide statistics that she might give us. So let's just begin with Erica and hear what she has to say. You can't tell us everything, Erica. Just give us like the top 4 or 5 things.
Okay, I definitely won't, because I can go on about this for hours. So I appreciate you all having me. And the fact is, what went wrong was almost everything. And the results show that. So Republican turnout and this is specifically for the governor's race, right? Because sometimes people only vote down ballot and things like that, but specifically for the governor's race, Republicans turned out 63% of registered Republicans across the state. And that outpaced Democrats, who only turned out at 47%. And luckily, we outpaced unaffiliated voters, so independent voters, if you will, at 37%. And normally, independent, unaffiliated voters usually seem, or it's theorized that they tend to lean more Republican. So if they had turned out even more, it was estimated that, Lee Zeldin would have gotten at least another 100,000 votes. So those are the statewide numbers that I have for you. And every county in New York State trended more Republican this year. Every single county. That includes here where I am in New York City.
And Melanie, do you have statistics about Long Island?
I do. Yeah, I do. So across Suffolk and Nassau County, Democratic turnout declined 7.8%. Republican turnout was up 5.7%. Now, it's important to remember that in Nassau County, we have close to a 91,000 Democratic voter advantage. In Suffolk, it's smaller, but it's still 35,000 or a little over 35,000. So, that trend holds here as well, for the island, that Republicans were unified and energized. They ran, in my opinion, a lot of vile candidates that fed their base exactly what they wanted. And as much as I hate to say it, that's the winning strategy. When you give your base what they want, look what happens. They get excited and they turn out. I really hope the Democratic Party learns that lesson soon, or sooner rather than later, because, cycle after cycle, I think we continue to make the same mistakes and we run milquetoast candidates who really moderate their message. And it's not working. I will say I love Erica Vladimir very much. She's a dear friend, but I disagree with her about the independent blank voters. I know that you're right that is theorized nonstop. And maybe it's personal for me because in Long Island, certainly in CD3, I know that I have knocked more doors than anybody, I've knocked tens of thousands of doors over the last couple of years. And it could be unique to CD3, but what I find more often than not with unaffiliated voters, it's not that they're in the middle. It's not that they trend more Republican, or as I like to say, like, what the heck is the middle of fascism and centrism? I don't know. But what I find is that they are fed up with the corruption. So they've left the party system because they're just fed up. But when you talk to them about policy, which is, as progressives, that's what we do, they more often align left than they do right, in my experience. It's anecdotal, though.
I like hearing that, though. We all need silver linings, so I appreciate you sharing.
I'm telling you, it's the truth. But if I could, Catherine, when you say what went wrong, and I'll top line it just for the interest of time, there are several things in particular to Long Island that went wrong, right? As I said, Republicans were energized. They had a strong unified ground game. Lee Zeldin took advantage of it. Now we know Russian oligarchs were funding their lawn signs, which I'm sure were turned your stomach out in Suffolk just as much as they turned mine out in Nassau County. So that of course was a part of it. I think redistricting was a fiasco, certainly for CD3. At one point, my district went up to the Connecticut border, and a lot of that just happened, splitting the primaries. Voters barely know when election day is anyway, and it was just very confusing. And I think some of that burnout and confusion, ran over into the general. And the other thing I will say, and I have been beating this drum for many years now, is that bail reform did affect these elections, not because it's bad policy, but because we haven't had, certainly in Nassau County, we haven't had a single elected official in Nassau County champion it. We haven't had a single elected official push back on it, talk about the merits. And it's okay. Look, if we pass policy and something isn't working, then we fix it, right? That's what we do. But we had Democrats, and I can't speak for Suffolk because I don't know, but I'm sure you all on this call can. In Nassau County, Democrats hid from the conversation. And I don't think it did, the Democratic Party any favors, because then there was one narrative and people were scared. And once people learn about bail reform, they're like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. But the reality is that the average person doesn't understand what bail is, doesn't understand the injustices, doesn't understand that it's a two-tiered classes system, right? So, I think to Erica's point, a lot went wrong. Very little went right.
Erica, since Melanie's talking about messaging, let's just talk about that aspect of things for a moment. I've heard some suggestions that Eric Adams' emphasis on the terrible crime rage that's going on in New York City fed into Zeldin's sole message about crime. How do you think Democrats across the state responded to it, and how do you think they should have responded to it?
Yeah, they didn't respond to it. The fact is, it shouldn't even, our response should not have even started when, Mayor Adams came out and basically championed all the fear-mongering falsehoods that we hear around crime and bail reform, falsely connecting them. I think that's also an important part of the conversation, that the rise in crime has nothing to do with the bail reform that was enacted. But we never should have been in a response situation. Democrats who passed this, right? Our state legislators passed bail reform. It was signed into law. We should have been proactive in the conversation. Our state party should have been talking with our elected officials to say, okay, we passed this law. We've got, elections coming up. How do we talk about this to our constituents? How does the party help us get that message out there? And not only did the party just not do anything and not even reach out to any elected officials, and Senator Zellner Myrie from Brooklyn, who was one of the leading authors of the bail reform law, said to state committee members that the party never reached out to talk about messaging. But Jay Jacobs, the chair, started touting the same things that Mayor Adams did. So he himself, as chair of the party, was going against what his own party did in our state legislature, what his buddy, Andrew Cuomo, even signed. And so I think right there, like that in and of itself is the massive problem, was that we put ourselves in a situation as the Democratic Party of being on the defensive as opposed to taking the offensive and touting this as a win for New Yorkers, for people who've been systemically oppressed by a system, a criminal system that's been built on slavery. And instead, we were on the defense. And when you get to that point, you lost. And that was the problem. And, and I think that did really hurt us. And then you also had Governor Hochul, who frankly didn't have messaging not only about crime and bail reform, but about anything. You see, if you're as obsessed with Twitter as I am, and I hate to admit that, but the first step to reconciling an addiction is to admit that you have one. I'm addicted to Twitter, but they called it a rose garden campaign, and what they mean is that she kind of just went on governing and was touting the things that she was doing as a governor versus a candidate, and really being out there and taking the podium and the bully pulpit as a candidate. And she didn't have a state party that said to her, Governor, we got to get you out there. And so we were always on the defense and we were always behind.
So I want to talk about the nitty gritty of campaigning for a moment. I heard many people in the Working Families Party say that they really began to panic in a month before the election and then started to go out canvassing, et cetera. Can you talk about those nitty gritty elements of campaigning that a lot of us saw as lacking, and what role the Working Families Party had in electing Hochul? Maybe Melanie, you could talk about that first.
Yeah, I can. I want to add one other important point to this discussion that I didn't mention when we talked about, the perfect storm here, that I don't think is getting enough attention. And I think certainly for us Long Islanders, we need to give it attention, which is the fact that, Governor Hochul essentially ran as a candidate against a Republican throughout the primary and then throughout the general, right? So I think some of this blame needs to be laid at the feet of Tom Suozzi, who beat the same drum that Lee Zeldin beat throughout his campaign. And I think, to Erica's credit, rightfully identifying that Governor Hochul really didn't have a message and didn't campaign on anything. So for a very long time, New Yorkers heard bail reform, dangerous criminals on the street, all these things. And it scared people because the average voter just doesn't know. So I wanted to throw that out there because I do think that's really important. But yes, the Working Families Party, look, part of it, they need to get a certain amount of signatures to maintain their party line. So, they of course had to get out a little bit, but there was definitely a moment of panic where it was like, I don't want to OSHIT kind of moment where it was like, these polls are not trending the way we thought. And I don't think anyone thought it would be as close a race as it was, even with all the, the perfect storm of barriers in place. But yeah, look, the Working Families Party mobilized their chapters, they mobilized their affiliates, they were phone banking, they were recruiting people to canvass, and they were out in the community. And frankly, that's what a good campaign should be doing anyway. Governor Hochul had come out to Long Island a couple of times, and instead of knocking on doors, she had lunch with community leaders, like 5 of them. And I don't know, whose strategy that was, but in terms of moving the needle, that's not it.
Erica put a comment in the chat that I would love you to say out loud in case people aren't listening, aren't looking.
Yeah. So the Working Families Party is the only party that had more votes on their ballot line than registered voters in every single county in the state. Wow. And the Working Families Party is known in pockets, right? It's New York City, they are very big. I know that they have some really good strongholds around like the Westchester area and the Hudson Valley area. But I have like some here. There was a 139% increase in people voting on the WFP line in Kings County, 160% increase of voters voting on the WFP line in Albany County, 149% increase in Erie County. And a big part of that was because it was the WFP who was reaching out to them. And I'll be a little, not meaner than Melanie, but a little more blunt. the WFP was losing its mind and became really scared. We had an emergency meeting 3 weeks before the election because we could not find a way to organize with the Hochul campaign or the state Democratic Party. Look, I'm a state committee member for the Democratic Party, but I am also a dues paying member for the Working Families Party because I believe in a lot of the progressive values that they fight for and believe that the Democratic Party should be there too. And that commitment to those values means that we get on the ground, we knock those doors, we send postcards, we phone bang. The Democratic Party couldn't even bother to send out an email blast until the day of the election at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually didn't realize that part, Erica. Thank you. Since Erica, you've been leading you've been one of the leaders to replace Jay Jacobs. Can you talk about why you think that would be a good thing to do and what you think it might change in terms of the dynamic that you've been describing?
Sure. So I want to start with this. The idea of replacing Jay Jacobs goes above and beyond Jay Jacobs as a person. It's because he's the chair of our party. And so what we mean by replacing Jay Jacobs is that we need somebody who is really ready, willing, and able to create real structural reform within the Democratic Party and how it operates here in New York State. So if you look at states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Nevada and all of the success that they have had, the way that their Democratic parties operate is so very different than the way ours does. Their state party chairs are full-time and they're paid. They fundraise up the wazoo. We don't fundraise anything here. And the money that we do have slightly gets funneled to county chairs. They are out there. They are recruiting candidates to run for office. They are training them in those states. We don't do any of that here in New York State. And the fact is that as his time as chair, Jay Jacobs has proven that he doesn't want to do any of those things. He doesn't want to build a Democratic Party here in New York State that is reflective of what us Democrats in New York State believe. Not a single Latino, Latina, or Asian American sits on the executive committee of our state party. And those people are appointed by Jay Jacobs. So right there, right, doesn't understand the inclusivity and diversity of New York State. He spent time looking to create a third party for his chosen Democratic primary candidates who would lose their primary. He is more interested in everything but the state party. And our state party really needs to be reformed. And that means we need somebody as chair who's invested in that and is ready to do so. And so there are a lot of state committee members who feel this way. And again, it's not progressive versus moderates versus centrist or anything like that. This is across the board that we're seeing with Democrats and Democratic state committee members. We're ready to have a new state party, and that means we need a new chair.
So Melanie, as somebody who lives in Nassau County, has had a lot of experience with Jay Jacobs because he's the county chair. And I don't want this to, I think it's not very productive for it just to be a Jacobs bashing session. But what do you feel he's done wrong there in Nassau? And how do you feel about the effort to replace him as New York State chair?
Well, as Erica well knows, I have been beating the drum that it is wise to be focused statewide, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that he is also the chair of Nassau County. And I think most of us on this call will remember that he was state chair and then he wasn't, and then he was called back up to be state chair again. And I think we need to think through a more comprehensive strategy. And I think Eric is right. It's really not about Jay as a person. Look, there are positives about Jay, dare I say, right? If he wants to fundraise, he could be a prolific fundraiser. We've certainly seen that with presidential candidates. He's got access to immense wealth. He runs incredibly prestigious camps that cost, many tens of thousands of dollars per month. So he has, the access. However, he has not made room at the table. In fact, he has fought us at every step of the way for younger people, for progressives. And I'll just anecdotally tell a quick story. Erica is a state committee person. I'm a Nassau County committee person. I'm only invited to a fundraiser where they charge me $500 and something a year. So for no reason, just because we're raising money for the party. I don't know where that money goes. We are not asked about platform. We are not asked about anything else. And then they send you their chosen candidates petitions to, petition for them. Interestingly, my state committee people, there's a woman, she's 94 years old. And if she were up for the job, I'd say, hey, that's awesome. But what did they do when you all had your state committee meeting? Our committee representatives just sent in their proxies. And so my husband and I were pretty angry about that. So we've raised the issue with our local Dem party. We called our zone leader and we said, what the hell's going on? And they asked, and the answer they received was, oh, we just sent our proxies. What's the big deal? Like, they had no conception of their role. They had no idea that they're supposed to be representing our area. And I think that's just the way, Jay that's the culture he's created. And I think this is how he wants it. So I think Erica was being generous when she said that Jay just doesn't have a party that reflects the diversity of New York. I don't even think he's at that step. I think he doesn't want that. It's all about power hoarding. We do have a committee structure in place on paper. So, the way Michigan and Nevada and even Georgia has been running, their organizing, we have that on paper. It just happens to be filled with names of people who are deceased, who don't know that they're a committee member, who are the folks that are just going to send in a proxy and are never going to raise a red flag about anything. And I think, look, we're really feeling the consequences of that. And if this election hasn't shown us that, we're in for some scary times ahead. That said, and this is the real exciting part, because he's done virtually nothing with this party, I think there's tremendous opportunity to bring in folks of all different kinds of, ideologies and really build something that we can stand for. I think, look, as a progressive, I know I'm not going to win every battle. I know that I'm going to fight for it, but I'm not going to win every battle. They make us out to be these like bratty kids that are just going to go home if we don't get what we want. But really, we're just asking for the change that our communities need. And so, I'm really proud of folks like Erica who run for state committee. And I think, creating, which we are already sort of creating the shadow type party, it's ripe, I think, for turnover, and it's ripe for rebuilding. And we can do that in an inclusive way that leaves no one behind, frankly.
So a lot of people I know who are on the state committee who wanted to change or talk about the proxy rule. And this may be a little esoteric for some people, but actually it makes a huge difference in the state committee. Erica, could you talk about that as briefly as possible, just so people understand, and talk about 2 or 3 rules that you think might make a difference in terms of reforming the state committee?
Sure. So proxy rules basically is, as Melanie said, if someone can't go to the state committee meeting, and there's 2 per year, 2 official ones, they can just say to someone, I'm giving you my votes to cast for me. But we also have weighted votes here in New York State, and our votes are weighted based on how many Democrats voted in the gubernatorial general election. And so someone might come in and they can have 15 people that they're doing proxy voting for, but that can count for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of votes when it comes to what we're doing on, in state committee. We want to reform that and make it so that there is a much more stricter limit, because, fun fact, a lot of state committee members give their proxy votes to Jay directly, so he gets to vote in their favor, or they give it to an executive committee member who's appointed by Jay. So of course they are more inclined to, vote the way Jay wants them to, and then they can just do the proxy votes, frankly, however they want. And then if they have to go back to the person that they carried the proxy votes for and say, oops, sorry, well, the vote's already been done, so it doesn't really matter. So changing that, the rules around proxy voting is one thing that we really want to do. We also want to make it so that you have to be a state committee member in order to be on the executive committee, because you don't have to be a state committee member in order to be appointed by Jay Jacobs. So yes, there are some very prominent lobbyists who sit on the executive committee of the state party and never ran to be a state committee member. See, Julie, this is why I have wine. We also want to have more meetings. We have 2 meetings a year. And it's like, you get there the night before and you have like fun, you know, like rubbing elbows and schmoozing and drinking like open bar. And then it's like a 4-hour meeting, but it's basically you hop from caucus to caucus. You hear elected officials basically give the same speech over and over in every single one. And no real work is actually done. So we want to have real meaningful state committee meetings when they are called, and we want to have more of them. We also want to have an orientation for state committee members. I'm really fortunate that the woman that I replaced chose to step down because she just, you know, had too much on her plate. She helped me understand what the state committee was like, and the other state party officials in my district helped me understand the state party as well as other state committee members from across the state that I'm friendly with. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can just be lost. And it can be really overwhelming. And it is very easy to do the bare minimum, because that's all that Jay and all of the leaders of the state party want, is for rank and file state committee members to do the bare minimum. So we'd like to see some type of orientation for people who are in state committee to actually know what happens. I think elected officials get some type of orientation when they get elected. So why not have the same? And then also recruiting candidates, but moving outside of electoral organizing and finally starting to get into issue organizing. And I want to give just like one brief like story about this. You know, back in 2020 when we had the ballot? No, 2021, the ballot.
2021, the ballot initiatives.
Yeah, the ballot initiatives, right, to protect democracy here in New York, and you know, a few other things that were really important, and they all failed. The Republican Party spent $30 million on an advertising campaign telling Republicans to vote no on this. The Democratic Party didn't spend a single dollar. And Jay's response, well, the state party has never spent money on ballot referendums. And my question to him was, just because we never did it in the past, why don't we do it in the future? That doesn't make it okay. And so we really want to get our state committee to be more involved in really setting a policy agenda and holding elected officials accountable to that policy agenda. So if you choose to run as a Democrat, you better support all these things that are on the Democratic Party platform. And if you don't, you might not get as much support, or you're going to get a lot of pressure from us to finally move the needle and take the votes that are necessary.
So I want to throw this to, I love what you just said, and I want to throw this to Melanie, because Melanie is the most intrepid canvasser I've ever seen among candidates. Well, maybe AOC was a more intrepid canvasser, I don't know. But how do you think that the Democratic Party could better connect with people in the neighborhoods, on the streets? Because I get very frustrated that people are leaving the Democratic Party. They don't want to hear about it. And I can't get them to understand that if they're not in the party, they can't be involved in the decisions the party makes.
Yeah, well, I think people leave for a very specific reason. And that's why we have this growing base of unaffiliated blank voters, right? And to your point, it's because they're fed up. This is why I'm friends with Erica, when she just said about the Democratic Party coming together to really identify what our platform is. I think that's such a smart step. It could still be very big tent-ish within reason. I think, you know, the fact that we run anti-choice Democrats, like, what is that? That's not a Democrat. And I don't think that that person should be in our party, you know, but it creates a space and it puts a flag in the sand. This is what we stand for. This is who we are. So there are no questions. And I think this is why we continue to run, you know, these milquetoast moderate candidates, because they are so vague. We don't know what they stand for. And I do think that's appealing to people. You know, I've been working with some new Democratic groups that are popping up, some progressive, some not so sure. They're figuring it out. But one thing has become very, very clear to me. It's that they are looking for leadership. They are looking to better understand the issues. They want to understand what is the messaging we use, what messaging works, and they're volunteers and they're ready, willing, and able to go. I think if you create a space, they will come. But it's tricky to do without that leadership. And I'll just tell you very quickly, I was at a meeting a week and a half ago, and our town party leader was there. And someone asked that question, like, I can't believe this. I can't believe a Republican won. I'm ready to go in the streets. What do I need to do? Can you give me the messaging? What do we stand for? And the party leader looked at this woman like she had 15 heads. And he said, well, we don't do that. And she said, but I want you to do that. Can't we organize it? She essentially was explaining what the committee structure should theoretically do. Can't we have these groups of people and one person is organizing them and then we spread out, and I was just like, wow. And to see, like, this is who Jay Jacobs handpicked, right? And he did so because none of it matters what the town thinks, because that person in leadership is doing Jay's bidding, which, unfortunately is, I think opposing progressives. So, Catherine, it's interesting. I think the opportunity is there. I think there are people who are excited, who want to get involved, but we have to create those spaces. I think too often we rely on the same groups and then we get really burnt out. And sometimes I think that, progressives on Long Island are playing a game of peewee football, right? The ball gets thrown over here because there's some fire. We all run over there to help and do what we can. And then there's the ball gets thrown here, it's a fire, we run over there. We've got to be a little bit more diligent. And I think, I've been pushing some of the progressive groups to put out a real platform and agenda. What's important to us? Because our problem as progressives is that we care so much. It's a good problem to have, but sometimes we lose focus on the issues or, our priorities, just because I think we're trying to spread ourselves a little bit too thin. How we combat that is by being diligent, but also by looking and developing new leaders. We have to constantly make room at the table, give people opportunities to lead, to step up. We need to mentor them. And that's how we're going to grow. I mean, untapped resource that I see, especially for progressivism, is young people. We can go table at college campuses. We can go talk to them, bring them in. If I was 18 years old, 19 years old, and I was watching what's happening in our government, I would be irate, probably more irate than I am right now. Our government is selling their future every day, and they're not doing a damn thing to help them. And I think we'll get a big response from young people.
So I guess there are two basic questions I have, and then we'll go to audience questions, but these are difficult questions. So I'll ask you, Erica, first. How realistic is the attempt to replace Jacobs and to fundamentally reform the Democratic Party? And what should we be doing in the inside and what should we be doing on the outside? Yeah. You get that one first, Erica.
Okay. So there are rumors, and I find them credible, and I'm not the only one, that Jay will be resigning. The governor publicly is, all about him and saying like he did a great job and she has no plans to replace him. But many state committee members and elected officials that I've spoken with all feel like there's no way she can possibly keep him. And so she's going to ask him quietly to resign so she doesn't have to fire him. So here's basically like what happens, because a lot of this is procedural as well. The minute we no longer have a chair of the state party, the chair of the executive committee becomes the interim chair. That is Christine Quinn. Not a great choice. So it is very likely that that Jay will be replaced. Who replaces him, I think, is the harder question. So in order for the state party to be able to replace anybody, be it Jay or let's say Christine Quinn, right? If like Jay resigns and Quinn becomes like the new interim chair, we need 1/6 of all state committee members to call for a special session, which is actually not that hard. And it has been done before. But then we need to have 2/3 majority of weighted votes to essentially vote somebody out and then somebody in as chair. And so that's the hard part, is ensuring that we can whip the votes. We don't know how possible that is. What we do know is that a lot of people on the outside, or excuse me, on the inside, state committee members and also county chairs, not a majority, it is a minority, but a bigger minority of county chairs than expected, as well as organizations like NYPAN, other local political clubs across the state, and other just advocacy organizations are pushing and putting potential names out there, or saying that, like, we want somebody new. And frankly, Governor Hochul owes a lot of her win to folks like us and organizations like Peer here, right? And also like state committee members. So she's gonna have to play nice. And so state committee members, there's a cohort of about 25 of us who are really working together to try and whip votes to see what we could do. We're also looking to set up a meeting with Governor Hochul to talk about what do we want to see in our state party? How do we want that to change? And what does, sort of like a job description, what does the state party chair need to embody and look and want to do in order for all of this to happen? At the same time, let's say, right, like we can't, change the chair for whatever reasons. We could still start putting forward resolutions to change the way that the party operates, even if it's under Jay. And there might be enough pressure to do that. There's a lot of state committee members who are saying, yes, we need to change the way our state party operates, but Jay is great, we should keep Jay. Okay, fine. Then let's bring him our proposals that a lot of people seem to be on board with, and some of them that I mentioned here, and put those, we have to put them in like resolution form. They have to get a minimum of like 10 signatures of state committee members to then be brought to the floor to then be voted on. But this, and usually if the executive committee or Jay doesn't support these resolutions, they don't pass. This past state committee meeting, there were 2 resolutions that that Jay and the executive committee did not support. And one of them was to start supporting ranked choice voting on a state level here in New York. And that got 40%. So it didn't pass. But the fact that I got 40% of weighted votes was massive. Like, I mean, it was my first meeting, but like the number of heads that were all looking at each other, really shocked that it happened. And then the second one was for the Build Public Renewables Act. So focusing and wanting the state party to basically come out publicly in support of Build Public Renewables Act, which basically said that we would allow the New York Power Authority to finally start building plants where they can use renewable energy versus just like us having to like farm that out to like third parties, and finally become like a green economy, because we're in a huge climate crisis. That got 48% of votes, and like there was yelling on the floor with the executive committee. They did not want this on there. And that was again seen as very progressive, right? That was like passed as like this progressive versus, the real Dem party. And like, that's why I shouldn't vote for. But we know that so many state committee members are supporting these state party reforms already. And so we can bring those forward, even if Jay's chair for like the rest of his life. And so we won't stop at just replacing Jay. We're going to work on reforming the party if it's Jay or Christine or anyone else.
So Melanie, a lot of people have been talking about a shadow party, and it's taken a lot of forms. I think that you've been part of some of those conversations. What form, do you think that's viable, and what purpose would it serve, and how would it be organized?
Yeah, I do. Look, when we started having these conversations years ago, it seemed like an insurmountable task. But I think, over the last several years on Long Island, there have been so many amazing leaders that have stepped up in a variety of ways that are essentially doing the work anyway. I think when we look at our team, if you will, and we look at the skill set that they bring to the table, we look at their passion, their ability to mentor, I think it's not, it won't take too much energy to just put an official structure in place. This isn't public yet, but Joe Sackman and I are actually organizing a retreat/conference, and we will be talking about this there and hopefully getting folks to sign up, because at the end of the day, it really, and to Erica's point about, it was the WFP, it was groups like Peer that really came out and did that push. We're the people at the doors. We're the people knocking. We're writing the postcards. It is us doing that work. It's not the committee people. So if we're doing the job anyway, I think it's fairly easy to pull folks together and make it happen, especially now, because I think, a lot of the folks who have been leading the way on this happen to be candidates running for office, this, that, and the other, and now are not. So I think it's viable. I really do.
So I think we'll get to some questions, and I might circle back to some action items after we hear from people in the audience. Julie, do you want to talk about who's going to ask?
We have
questions?
3 people asking about, are there any, and Jackie Gavin chimed in with some names, but does the Working Families Party have a candidate that they would like to see replacing Jay Jacobs? Are there other names floating around? What allies do we have in favor of replacing Jay Jacobs? But any specific names to contribute to the conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I will say about WFP, WFP officially will not be getting involved in this, because they themselves are actually a political party. So they have their own state committee with their own executive committee, with their own state committee members and their own chair. But there are a lot of people like myself who are very much involved with WFP on the ground, who are part of the Democratic Party. WFP is not stupid. They know that a lot of what they do and the work that they do right now does hinge on the success of the Democratic Party. Look, if Lee Zeldin won, WFP would have been cut off at the knees. And so, they do have a level of investment in the Democratic Party, and that I think is very much so on a grassroots level as well. In terms of allies that we have when it comes to like finding a new chair, there is a statement that was put out by a group of us state committee members that garnered over 1,300 signatures, and that was everything from state committee members to county committee members to district leaders to town council members, city council members, county legislators, organizations, and also just regular New Yorkers who volunteered on campaigns. And so we do have a lot of allies, and a lot of, state committee chairs that are working together, who do want to see change. I know that Jay Jacobs has also sent, around a letter that county chairs were asked to sign in support of him. And, it did get about 39 out of 63, 62 county chairs to sign on. But we've already gotten calls from some of those that were like, well, Jay picks up my call when I call him, and that's why I signed on, but we clearly need to do more. So they themselves are also like willing to, let Jay go if they know that they're not going to be hurt in the process. Again, unfortunately, quid pro quo politics is always at play here. And in terms of names that have been floated around as to like who would be chair, I know someone mentioned, so Jacqueline, about Senator Ramos and Congressmember Espaillat. Congressmember Espaillat supported, people running in the primaries against some of our really like amazing state senators, Senator Robert Jackson, who basically led the fight for public schools to get the funding that they are owed by the state since the early 90s. And then also Gustavo Rivera in the Bronx, who, is one of like the most active health chairs that we've had in the New York State Senate. And so I don't think anyone's a fan of Adriano Espaillat. There is something known as the Espaillat machine himself. And so I think this would sort of be like he would use the Democratic Party for his own advantage. And a lot of people feel that way. Senator Ramos is definitely from what we've been hearing, making calls herself because she would like it. And look, people are torn. Me personally, I don't think we should have an elected official be the chair. I think that that's just going to be an inherent conflict of interest, that they're going to try and, balance it with what they need to do in order to maintain their seats, in order to get a committee, appointment that they want, or when they're aspiring to a higher office. I mean, it's becoming no secret that Senator Ramos wants to run to be mayor of New York City. I don't need her or anyone who's an elected official using our party for their own personal benefit. And unfortunately, here in New York State, Democrats tend to be corrupt. And so we really need someone whose main focus is going to be the state party. Another name that's been floating around is Javon Richard or Richardson. I apologize, I forget his last name, but he's the chair of the New York State Young Democrats. I know that he, people had approached him about that as well. And then there are just some other major organizers who have been part of like the NAACP or a lot of education advocacy organizations. But there doesn't seem to be a specific name so far that has really risen to the top.
Melanie, you had an interesting reaction to one of those names just now. Do you have any feelings about having a couple of people whom we're suggesting as replacements for Jacob?
I always have feelings.
I know you do.
Look, at the end of the day, I would just like someone who's going to work in the best interest for change. Right. Not just to elect the most blues, because when we just fight blues versus red, it's the people that lose every single time. So I want a party chair that's going to be looking at strengthening the party, strengthening the grassroots of the party, that's being inclusive and bringing folks in, giving people opportunity. That's really what I want to see. And I will echo what Erica said. I don't think it's a good plan to insert someone as Dem party chair, especially at the state level, if they're going to be running for office. I think it's a huge conflict of interest, and we've got enough corruption. I think we'd be better off finding someone who is clean and ready and willing to do the work and has a history of doing the work. Catherine, I know you and I were on an IPAN call not too long ago having this discussion, and there was an idea floated about having co-chairs or, several folks at the top. So it's a shared responsibility. Because look, not everybody can organize and fundraise, right? Fundraising, I can tell you from personal experience, is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult, but the right party chair right now, after losing Long Island, after losing CD3 and CD4, which should have been given seats, I think we've got a national case right now to start fundraising like crazy in New York. But we need the right person. We need someone who is morally on the up and up and is just going to do an honest job. I don't need them to be perfect, but I need them to be honest and willing to really fight for us.
So I see that Catherine has a couple of questions. Do you want to ask those questions, Catherine? Soka?
Oh, sure. Well, the last question I asked relative to this is if either of you know a county chair who you feel is not corrupt and would do the good work.
Well, I definitely don't want someone who says, well, at least Jay picks up the phone when I call. If that's all they're like looking for and think it's good, no, thank you. And I did mention Utica County Party Chair, Kelly, and I'm going to forget her last name, but I've heard amazing things about her. There are state committee members in Utica and surrounding counties that are just so impressed with what she does. But it has also sounded like she has been offered like certain positions, not state committee chair, but like other things. And she doesn't want this to be like a full-time role for herself. And so she's happy being a county chair, which is a little disappointing, but sometimes just got to ask a woman 7 times before she says yes. So
true.
Yeah. We know that's true about asking a woman to run for office. So maybe we just got to ask her like another 5 times.
Well, that'd be great. I also have a question circling back to the governor's race. I don't know if that would be appropriate now, Catherine Levy. Shall I?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. I mean, I'm not sure that we can talk too much about it, but it's an interesting question that you asked. I think you should ask it, Catherine.
So I know that Governor Hochul had apparently quite a bit of money in her campaign chest, and I'm wondering if you know how much she spent. Was there any left, and where was it spent?
Good question. So this is a drum that I've been beating with the press a lot. And unfortunately, we will probably not know what she has spent until I believe it's a December 8th filing. And that's like a post-election filing. And that's when like we'll really be able to dig into everything. So I will say the only thing I can really say is stay tuned, because you are not the only one who wants to know where her $50 million went if it did go to her campaign.
So I'd like both of you to end with something that you can give people hope about, those of us who still believe in electoral politics, and also what you think our action items should be, both in terms of changing the Democratic Party, but also going forward as a parallel group working from the outside. I'll begin with Melanie.
Good questions. What do I think we can do from the outside? As I mentioned earlier, I think we need to become more focused and more diligent. I'm at a place personally where I'm not going to knock doors for just any Democrat, even if they're my Democratic candidate. I am laser focused on only electing progressives at this point. And if it means I'm going to get in the car and drive upstate, or to knock on progressive doors, that's where I'm going to be knocking, or phone banking. I'm not doing it for any blue anymore. A lot of Black men actually changed my mind on this when I was begging them to vote for Biden, and they answered me by saying, what does it matter if I vote for Biden or Trump? I'm dead either way. And that really changed my harm reduction strategy. So, my pitch to progressive groups would be to look for the progressive candidates. If you want to help electorally, we've got to stop spreading ourselves too thin. If there's a Democrat running and they do not support your values, go find a progressive somewhere else in the state. You guys are a powerhouse of a group. That would be my recommendation there, because one thing that I think is really important, reforming the Democratic Party is not going to come quickly, and it's definitely not going to come easily if it can be done. I think it's worth the shot for a variety of the reasons that were discussed tonight. But we have to mentally prepare ourselves and understand that this is a long fight. It's not going to be overnight. Even if we get rid of Jay, and even if we get a great party chair, there are still going to be issues that we're going to have to work through. To me, I would like to see, or for me, I think I would like to see that us focus more on campaign finance reform. I think that is the death of democracy. I'm really happy to see, campaign finance reform finally at the state level. That's a huge win. I think, Erica talked a lot about recruiting candidates. I think we should be looking now for candidates, because that's a game changer. To be able to help elect progressives. I don't think it can happen, and I say this very sadly and humbly, but as a progressive that ran twice for Congress, I don't think it can be done on the federal level unless you have access to immense wealth. I don't think we're going to flip congressional seats to progressive, but we can start to really pack the state and then hopefully get them there that way. We're not going to see AOC style, progressive congressional candidates anymore. I think the Democratic Party has wisened up. You have your, crypto bros, et cetera, just pouring too much money in. And I hate to say it, I wish it wasn't true. I didn't believe that for a long time, but it didn't matter how many doors we knocked at the end of the day. So, I
I'm
think.
sorry, could you just clarify what you mean by what you said about the crypto, for those on the call who might not understand?
Oh, yeah. So Sam Blankman-Fried, if you've heard of him, he set up a super PAC and endorsed, now it's come out that, he kind of billed himself in the media as the Democratic savior and pledged to donate $1 billion to Democrats this cycle. He ended up donating 41 million or so to Democrats, but then it turned out he was donating to Republicans' super PAC, so like in a dark way, because he didn't want that to be in the press. But some of the Democrats he was donating to are on Long Island are for sure. I know Josh Lafazan took a hefty amount. Laura Gillen took a hefty amount. Now we're seeing folks that are associated with this crypto bro, as I like to call him, losing their jobs. So if you're familiar with Data for Progress, Sean McElwee was just ousted with a vote of no confidence because of his association. He was advising him on candidates to give to, et cetera. There's going to be a big fallout. But at the end of the day, truthfully, it doesn't matter if it's crypto, it doesn't matter if it's insurance, if it's pharma, if it's weapons manufacturing, it doesn't matter. We can, and this is a good plug for Invest in Our New York locally, Erica, but we cannot be hoarding wealth into the hands of a few who then play puppets with our democracy, because that's what's happening. And frankly, it does not matter where it's coming from. This is why we really need campaign finance reform. We need publicly funded elections. Otherwise, democracy is dead. We don't live in a democracy anymore. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but we do not. We live in an oligarchy. Elections are controlled by money. And it's almost always the person with the most money wins, almost always, no matter how good or bad they are. Corruption, Susan, that's exactly right. And it's unfortunate because we've got a lot of wonderful, amazing candidates running all the time, and they're getting trounced over and over and over again because progressives can't raise money. They can, but I'll tell you, I was on the phone 40 hours a week and we raised about $400,000. I don't know what else I could have done. I honestly don't. It doesn't even matter. Even if I raised $1 million. My centrist Republican posing as a Democrat opponent would have raised 2 million. It just doesn't matter. But we need to even the playing field. And I think we really need to have some soul searching and some heart to hearts, particularly here on Long Island. So I will definitely send you all the information about our retreat. And I say it's a half retreat, half conference, because I think if you're feeling like me, and I suspect you are, a lot of us have been kicked in the teeth so much, we just need to fill our cup. And I think there's no better way to do that than to be with like-minded people and really remember why we do this work and how impactful it is. And then we'll do some real work afterwards. Yes, Joe Sackman is planning the retreat with me. Yes.
Breathtaking as always, Melanie. Erica, any forward-looking statements or action items from you?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, internally, the state committee members are working to put together a job description of sorts for what we would want in the state party chair, and also a proposal for what a real functioning professionalized state party can look like. And a big part of what we know is missing right now is the willingness of our state party apparatus to really tap into groups like PEER and tap into organizations. It's just, and that's because people like Jay Jacobs don't like progressives, and they look down on us and would rather just kick us to the curb or just frankly ignore us. And so, having you all weigh in on what we're doing is going to be really important. I know that there is a bigger effort in the bigger NYPAN. I think it's the board, and I apologize, I'm not a NYPAN member, so I don't necessarily know the structure, but they're also looking to put together a job description of sorts and start looking at names of people that they might think might be good to put as chair. You can send those to the NYPAN. You can also just send them to me, and I can make sure that those are included in our conversation. I'm taking the lead on drafting the job description, and my male counterpart from my assembly district, Jeremy's, is taking the lead on putting together the proposal for the state committee reforming it. And so happy to just take your thoughts as a group of what you might think need to be done. And I want to sort of circle back to what the meeting started with the assembly member and what you all accomplished in, out on the East End. You raised taxes on the rich in the richest part of Long Island. That's, and I'm sorry because I'm a cursor, that's a big fucking deal. A very big deal. And so that goes to show how much power you have outside of being represented by Republican officials. And so I think continuing to tap into elected officials like the assembly member and working alongside of them and seeing how you can help them and, is going to be really important, because he's going to be able to go back to the assembly leadership and say, my constituents are saying this, and this is what I need. And then the assembly leadership is going to take that to the governor and say, this is what our members are telling us. This is what we need to get done. And so I do think that we are in a position right now to put a lot more pressure on our elected officials for the things that we've been fighting for, and then somewhat circumventing what, you know, the Republicans want. We still have I think we're at a supermajority still in the state Senate, or like we're one below. We still have a supermajority granted by the skin of our teeth, but still in the assembly. As the Democratic majority, we could do this. We know what it means to put pressure. You all know what it means to turn out and actually get things done. And so I would say continue to start doing that. And, you know, I know, Catherine, you asked about like electoral organizing, but I think that that is connected to issue organizing, holding your elected officials accountable for what you want them to support, and not only just vote yes on, but come out, talk publicly, push back. Make it known. Sometimes take the hard no vote if they have to. Doing that then in turn can translate to electoral organizing during the election season and building your base. The more you're able to do that and you get people, and you know, Melanie really talked about this really well, of empowering people and giving them opportunities to take grassroots leadership roles, because then they're going to get excited and they're going to start doing that. And soon enough, someone as baller as Melanie is going to make themselves known. And it's like, you know what, we're going to run that person for town council. We're going to run that person for county legislators. Don't forget about your local elected offices as well. That is also just as important. And so it's this cyclical thing. And we just have to realize that, like, as much as like we need to change the system, we can still make change while we're changing the system. And you all have proven that.
Right, and I must say that there were referenda that we would all approve of that won all across the country at the same time that Democrats sometimes lost. Yeah. So and the effort on the community housing fund here and the great success of it shows that a concerted campaign can change things. So that's a good note to end on. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. And really a big thanks to Erica and Melanie for joining us and helping us really understand a little bit of the weeds behind what's going on in the state. You know, there is no easy answer really at the end of the day. And it's really just about staying engaged. I dropped in the chat Jerry Maslanka's email because Jerry is our connection to Ione, Invest in Our New York, which Erica is very much involved with. And so if you want to stay involved with that, please contact Jerry. And we'll let everybody know about the workshop/party that Melanie and Joe Sackman are going to put together so that we can all gather and celebrate and roll up our sleeves together. So that'll be forthcoming. And don't forget, if you want to get involved in the Successful Community Housing Fund, please email me and we'll get you going on the work that we have ahead, because there's a lot of work for us all. But I hope that you're seeing that we have wonderful people who are on the ground doing these work. So let's give a very warm round of applause to Melanie and Erica for their efforts and their time tonight.
Thank you.
You know, unmute yourself if you want. So.
Thank you so much. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about this all day. So I really appreciate you having us.
This is
you
like
want to put a shout out to your next meeting while you're here, Erica? I don't know if you want to, but you're welcome to.
There are going to be a lot of rallies for Invest in Our New York, right?
Yeah, so on Monday, December 5th at 12 p.m., I will put the link in again. We are having the 2023 Invest in Our New York campaign launch. And one of the locations is on Long Island. It's going to be in front of the Theodore Roosevelt Executive and Legislative Building in Mineola. So I personally won't be there. I'm bottom lining the one here in New York City, but we're also having it in Albany as well as Yonkers. And so really, really excited about that. You know, last year we really focused a lot on how our state is spending money. The year before that, we really focused on raising revenue through taxing the ultra wealthy and corporations what they owe. This year we're doing both. So we have a legislative agenda that looks to raise about $40 billion in new public funds every year. And then we have a spending agenda on things like universal childcare, affordable housing. I think it's about like $10 billion towards affordable housing on a state level. Combating the climate crisis. We're really working in partnership with the New York Renews Coalition and putting $10 billion towards that. And then raising the minimum wage is a big thing, making sure every worker, freelancers, undocumented workers in New York have access to things like unemployment insurance, and expanding our public health exchange. So undocumented folks in New York have access to that as well. So I will make sure I share that. We have that like detailed out as well. If you sign up on that Mobilize link, but I'll also be sharing all of this on our Saturday morning calls with the Invest in Our New York generalists. We'll have a social media toolkit that you can use if you can't be there in person. And this is just the beginning. Session starts in January and we've got, you know, budget negotiations and all of that go through till April 1st. So we'll have a lot more to get involved in.
Catherine, could I make an announcement?
Sure.
Yeah, there are two events coming up this Saturday, and they're both in Port Jefferson. One is in front of the Pindar Wine Store. The newly formed Farm Workers Union is having a demonstration there, along with the Grinch, who will be there. And I think it's at what, noon? If I'm not mistaken. And the other, and I'm going to be running back and forth down the block, but the North Country Peace Group is having their usual demonstration, bringing poverty to the fore at the Dickens Festival. Evidently, the people think that Dickens is about Victorian dresses and high hats, but it's also, they don't really read, I guess, what Dickens wrote about. So they're going to be coming as, you know, please, sir, can I have some more? And coming as urchins, and it should be very interesting.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, and I was
Love it.
I was very happy to participate today just to get information. I'm with the Poor People's Campaign, and we don't endorse candidates, but a lot of what you're talking about, we believe in changing the narrative by changing the narrator. And I think what you're talking about is changing the narrator who's expressing what the people want. And, you know, I learned a lot from this discussion. I wish we could have this housing fund where I live in Mastic Beach, but it's not happening anytime soon. So thank you very much.
Can I just have to add real quick, Susan. I saw Reverend Barber speak at an abortion rights protest in DC, and as usual, he did not disappoint. And he said, if they don't give us what we want, we're going to primary every last one of them. And I was like, so, you know, he's, I'm with you there. I was,
basically, you know, we have to, grassroots is where it's going to bring change. Right. Because there's so many people hurting on the grassroots that an inactive or, you know, corrupt political parties are not expressing the needs of the people. And it's terrible. I mean, the campaign finance is, you know, and I looked up, I did some research on our representatives locally, and I wondered why the campaign finance reform law didn't pass. And then I looked at the contributions that various developers gave to various people that voted against the campaign refinance reform. So it's just, you know, it's like a loaded card game. And I appreciate every one of you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Susan. Thank you.
And we have to make people understand that they have to pay attention to their neighbors who are really living in poverty. I mean, I heard a stunning statistic a week ago that over 100,000 of New York City's public school children are homeless, which is a really remarkable statistic for this wealthy state. So thank you, Susan, for doing that work.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. I mean, Melanie, just a quick question. Do you know when you and Joe's workshop will be? Will it be in January or?
We're trying to have it sooner rather than later. Right now, we're trying to secure some funding and figure out what space will be able to effectively hold us. I was looking at a science museum that has some walking trails, but we're still in the
Okay,
figuring out phase.
good luck. We look forward to that. Thanks, everybody. It's 9:15. Let's go have that glass of wine or dinner. Thank you all for being
Finish
here
that.
tonight.
Thank
Yeah.
you for having me. I
Finish that glass
appreciate
of
you
wine.
all. Thanks for the work y'all
Thank
do.
you, Mel and Erica.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, Catherine.
night.
Hi, everybody. Hi,
Bye.
Julie.